Hey there, welcome back to Deep Dive Dialogues, or if you're new here, welcome to Deep Dive Dialogues. I'm your host, Dan Warheide, and today I want to talk to you about creating the life and the thriving business that you deserve by establishing those genuine, authentic connections and creating opportunities by having powerful conversations with people. Some of you have heard me say that I serve without selling. And you've told me how that's piqued your curiosity. Most coaches I've encountered who may be new to the business of coaching have an aversion to sales. And believe me, I've been there. However, that comes from, your personal experiences throughout your life, or maybe it's a preconceived notion or perception of what sales is. And that's really a different conversation. But I want you to hear me on this. I have learned to love the art of sales. That comes from intentional practice and study around sales and getting out there, putting myself out there in a sales capacity for a different purpose, not related to my coaching, because I don't conduct sales calls when I'm speaking with people who may be potential clients about my coaching. So I want to share with you one method that I have studied and continue to work on applying in my own journey. And it comes from the Prosperous Coach. The Prosperous Coach Approach is inspired by a book written by Steve Chandler and Rich Litvin. That is The Prosperous Coach. I will include a link to that in the show notes, of course. I just want to say it's had a profound impact on how I approach client creation. Instead of focusing on sales or promotion, it's really about connecting deeply with people, understanding their goals and their challenges, and providing genuine value without any pressure to sell coaching. And I believe that that's key because, like I said, the idea of selling often for people is uncomfortable. This approach removes any of that pressure so we can serve from a place of curiosity and authenticity. So I want to walk you through those core principles and the steps to build those connections that could potentially lead to paid coaching relationships in the future. Before I do, I just want to remind you that I'd love to hear from you. So I've added a new feature to my podcast. If you look in your current player, I know it's true for Apple Podcasts. I'm not positive about all of them. I haven't tested them all, but you should see at the top of the show notes, there's a link to text Dan. You could text me there or visit my podcasting website, podcast.danw.us, and shoot me a voicemail, send me a note. Let me know what your questions are or what you might like to hear about. More importantly, I'd love to hear from you, your answer to one question. What is the most challenging thing, the most frustrating thing that you're experiencing as it pertains to building your online coaching business or consulting business? Go ahead and send me a note. I'd love to hear from you. And if you send me a voicemail, that could potentially end up on a future episode. Either way, I'll give you a shout out. So let me know if you'd like me to include your name or a project you're working on, a podcast, whatever it may be. And I'd be happy to do so. So let's dive into the core philosophies of the Prosperous Coach first. The main idea is to create clients through genuine service-based connections. It's not about pitching or selling. It's about being present, being curious, being generous. It's about showing up for others and building relationships that are real and valuable. Not only do they feel authentic to the people that you're engaging with, but they feel authentic to you. Most likely, if you're hearing this, if you're listening to my voice, authenticity is one of your core values that you hold near and dear. So I have found this approach to be just so aligned with who I am and how I like to show up and serve. So what are the 4 steps of the Prosperous Coach? Let's talk about that really quickly. The first step is to connect. You focus on connecting with people that you genuinely want to speak to. And I paused for a second because I'll come back to that. But the second one is to invite. Make invitations to have powerful conversations with people. Create Create clients by focusing on delivering consistent value to your current clients, to the people that you're inviting into those powerful conversations. And then, when the time is right, propose. Make bold proposals to potential clients. The other key ideas that I want you to take away about the Prosperous Coach, and I highly suggest that if you haven't read the book, you go out and buy it. I will leave a Amazon link for you. You can purchase it right after you listen to this episode, or you can pause this episode, go check the show notes, click on it, and put that in your cart, click purchase, and it'll be on its way. But focusing on relationships, right? Instead of cold calling, focus on building genuine relationships with people. Show potential clients what you can do. Help them to understand what you can do for them rather than just telling them. It's hard to explain the concepts of coaching to people who may not be familiar with what coaching can do for them. It's much easier to show them. Set high standards. Set high standards for your clients to ensure the coaching relationship that you have with them is transformative. But more importantly, set high standards for yourself. Continue to learn, grow, to achieve that next level. Challenge yourself consistently, right? We'll come back in another episode and talk about pricing, because there's been a lot of conversations in the last couple of weeks, actually, in communities I'm involved in around the topic of pricing. And I believe that this high standards piece contributes directly to charging more, and charging more contributes directly to higher standards. When you charge more, you wake up in the morning and you do more. You're challenging yourself to do more, to deliver, to over-deliver, to give that value in excess of what you think, your perception of what your client expects from you. So definitely set high standards for yourself and for your clients. Understand yourself. Understand who you are and how you coach. And finally, be committed to coaching no matter what. If this is the business that you want to create, you must remain committed, fully focused, all in. Why does this approach work? This approach is effective because people can sense authenticity. When you're genuinely interested in people, in their growth, their challenges, their visions, they genuinely feel valued. And trust starts to build naturally. You're focusing on helping them to solve real problems instead of trying to close a sale. And the beauty of this is that it's effective for new coaches, the same as it's effective for seasoned ones, because it comes back to genuine, authentic connection. So when I let go of, this is what I wanted to come back to earlier. When it comes to creating the connections, right? The book suggests that you start with the people that you want to reach out to. Typically, when we look at this, we're looking at this from a certain perspective. I would love for that person to become a paying client of mine. Now, what I found and what has worked well for me, and, take what you like from this, of course. If you didn't like what I have to say, maybe you're not listening anymore anyway. But I found that I needed to remove any attachments to any specific outcome in this process. It became much more enjoyable and much more effective. And it's really amazing to see what we focus on when it comes to connections versus potential for outcomes. People can feel it when we're there to help, not to get something from them. So how do I put this approach into action? And actually, before I get to that, let me just say, right, removing those attachments. I started with removing attachments on whom I was reaching out to and connecting with. That really changed the game for me. And I do like the word game because I try to make it fun. I like games. I enjoy games. And this process of creating connections and potentially creating new clients Making bold proposals is ultimately a game. How many no's can I achieve? Right? The more no's I achieve, the more potential and possibility that exists for a yes. Not everybody wants to pay the fees that I propose, and that's okay. And I don't know, I'm recording this in my apartment office and there's sirens in the background. I hope they don't appear on this episode. If so, life is what it is. So moving on. How do I put this into action? So I think that there is a few steps to creating those initial connections using this approach. The first step is to engage in authentic conversations. This is about showing up with curiosity, not with some sales pitch in mind. Imagine that you're getting to know the person, because hopefully you are. Find out what drives them, what excites them, what challenges they might be facing, whether it's in their business, their personal lives, or maybe your coaching focuses on a specific niche, and that's wonderful. What challenge are they facing as it pertains to your niche? Here are some potential conversation starters that can help you keep things a bit more natural and open-ended, right? It's important to ask open-ended questions of people rather than asking yes or no questions, because that doesn't invite more conversation. So ask things like, what's something you're aiming to accomplish this year that is really important to you? What's been your biggest challenge or struggle lately? If you had all of the resources you needed, where would you like to see yourself in the next year? What about the next 3 years? These questions are designed, I pulled them off the internet, but they're designed to bring out the person's goals, some of their interests or challenges, without you having to feel like you need to sell anything at all. As they open up, you get to learn more about who they are, their story, and you'll start to see how or where you could potentially be of service. Step number 2 in these connections. This is what I like to call micro connections. Once the conversation's begun, the next step is to create those micro connections. These are small, authentic touch points, if you will, that might lead to something bigger down the line. But remember, I said remove the attachment, right? If you have an attachment to a specific outcome, I want this person to become my client, this process is not as enjoyable. It's not as easy, and it doesn't feel as truly aligned and authentic to me. Maybe it will for you, and that's okay. We are each different. One process works for me, may not work for everyone else. And I fully appreciate and accept that. So it's not about trying to push people towards a coaching conversation. Instead, it's about nurturing that relationship in a natural way, those micro connections. So here's some examples and practical ways that you could look to building those touch points, those micro connections. You can comment on their social media posts, especially if they're sharing something personal or about their business. And more importantly, especially if there's something of value that you can add to the conversation. Follow up on previous interactions you've had with people. For instance, if they mentioned a project to you or something they'd like to achieve, you could check in on their progress. Maybe you could share a helpful resource if you come across something relevant, like an article, a podcast, or some tool that aligns with something they've shared with you. These are simple gestures that show you're genuinely interested and helps to build familiarity over time. Think of them as planting seeds, right? They're not meant to bear fruit today, but it's meant to keep the connection alive. And who knows what can happen in the future. Without the attachment to any specific outcome other than creating those connections, it's a much freer experience. Step 3, it's all about creating value first. It's central to the Prosperous Coach Approach. Before you ever think about inviting someone to any kind of formal coaching conversation, focus on how you can add value to their life. Examples of how you can create value. Again, if they mention a challenge, share an insight or tip that you think might help them. Simply listening deeply can help. Sometimes that is the most incredibly valuable experience when someone takes the time to actually listen to the words you're sharing with them, the stories, the vulnerabilities, right? They're more apt to engage with you at a deeper level if you take the time to listen. I've been complimented a number of times on my ability to create a safe space for my clients to feel completely comfortable with sharing with me. And while I'm going to do some journaling around that topic in particular, I think, to dig in a little bit more as to where that ability stems from, because I'd like to understand that part of what I bring to the table. But I love that kind of feedback. The ability to connect with people at a deeper level is absolutely important when it comes to the business of coaching and to the business of serving people, whether that's your personal passion or your business. Either way, it applies. Then offer them a complimentary session if they're open to it, but position it as a way to help them gain clarity on a specific issue, not as some sort of teaser for a potential sale. I'll get more into specifics of how I apply this moving beyond creating connections in another episode, most likely, but this one's kind of focused around that building genuine, authentic connections piece. So there might be a couple notes in here that I'm going to add that help solidify the full process. Again, this is just to be more focused on the connection piece, the connection step, which is the first step of the 4 steps in the Prosperous Coach. So again, the idea is to get people to experience how your expertise and support without any strings attached could potentially benefit them. It helps to build trust. They'll be more likely to consider working with you because they've already seen the impact you can make in their life. Finally, when you sense that a connection is there, you can invite them to that coaching conversation. Here's the key. Think of it as inviting them and not in selling to them. You're not going to sell to them in this initial coaching conversation either. It should feel natural, like an extension of your existing or ongoing conversations. Here's how you could potentially frame those. Hey, I'd love to explore this with you more deeply if you're open to a conversation. I could set aside some time on my calendar, what works best for you. And if you want to apply some things you've learned from sales, you could say, I have this Thursday open. Would 11 a.m. or 2 p.m. be better for you? You don't even have to take it that far, though. Just ask the question, hey, I'd love to, or I'd be happy to explore this with you if you're open to that kind of conversation. Hey, if you're interested, we could dive into this further in a more formal coaching session. No strings, no obligations, and no expectations that you'll ever become a paying client. But I really think that I might be able to add some value to this topic. It's a simple invitation. There's no pressure. It keeps things light, and they will feel free to say yes or no without any sort of uneasy feelings. So let's talk about a quick example for you. Imagine that you meet someone at a networking event and you start talking about their business. They start talking about your business. As you're talking, they mention that they are struggling with focus or clarity. And maybe you share with them a quick tip about how time blocking or prioritization could potentially help them. If they seem interested, you can follow up later with a message. Hey, I enjoyed our conversation. If you'd ever like to dive into that topic more, I'd love to chat with you about it. It's a natural progression that leads to potential for coaching conversations without the pressure of feeling like you have to sell someone something. They don't feel like you're selling to them. They feel like you're being authentic because you are, and you feel more genuinely aligned with who you are and the value that you bring to the table. Again, I said I'll cover a little bit more in depth some of these steps that I've applied in my approach and that I've learned from my coach, continue to develop and implement new things in this process to help me really solidify how I can align these steps for who I am. But today's was really about the connection building. So here's something I want to talk about. Let's talk about some practical tips to implement what I've already shared. How do you make this approach part of your regular routine? Here, I have just a few suggestions. The first suggestion in making this a regular routine is to create a daily habit. Simply reach out to 2 or 3 people each day or every other day, whatever you choose is best for you and your schedule. Whether you're commenting on their posts, you're following up on a past conversation, or you're starting a new one, make it a habit. The second thing I think is important in making this part of your regular routine is being able to track your progress. Use a journaling app or a journal and keep track of these connections. Reflect on what you're learning from each interaction and stay open to the process, how it might align with you, how you might more align with the process, what tweaks or changes can you make. That journaling piece is wildly important. I'm learning to make that more of a daily habit for myself. So the next thing and the final thing I think you can use to make this a part of your regular routine is to focus on curiosity and service. And remember, the goal is to serve, not to sell. Approach each conversation with genuine interest and let go of any attachments to a specific outcome. I think that I've covered everything I wanted to today in today's episode. So what did we cover? Really quickly, we covered the key steps of the Prosperous Coach Approach. I did not go fully into each step and how I've applied them into my business or my coaching conversations and creating clients. Again, this was really focused around the initial step, which is the connection, creating connections or connecting with people. So engaging in those authentic conversations and then building those micro connections, creating value first, and then potentially inviting them into a deeper conversation when it feels right. So this week, I want to challenge you to start 3 new conversations. Start with just 3 new conversations. Focus on being curious and giving service. See where these connections take you. And again, I'd love to hear about your experiences. So I'd further invite you to share your journey. You can go to my podcasting website at podcast.danw.us or reach out to me on any social media. You can leave me a voicemail on my website. You can send me a note on my website. You can also sign up to be on my mailing list there. No strings, no obligations. And I'm not going to try and sell you anything. Maybe later. I don't know. It won't be a sales conversation. I can promise you that. So, hey, thanks for joining me today in Deep Dive Dialogues. And remember, creating the life and business you deserve starts with building those authentic connections. So until next time, I want you to keep showing up, stay curious, and keep making a difference in the lives of the people you serve. Now, before you go, if you found value in this episode or another, there's one way that you could really help me beyond answering those questions or sharing your journey with me. Reminder, the question that I've asked is, what's the biggest challenge you're facing? What's the most frustrating thing you're experiencing when it comes to growing your coaching business? So one thing you can do for me that would really help get this show in front of other people, to get my voice heard, to share these things. If you find them, anything in here has been effective for you or intriguing to you, share this episode or this show with one other person you think may benefit from it. I'd be super grateful. Until then, have a great one.